Okay, welcome everyone. Bruchim Habayim. We're continuing our shiurim on Sefer Bereshis, but tonight it's going to be on Chanukah and shiurim on Sefer Bereshis. And this year shiurim 5786 Tavshin Pevav are dedicated by the Israeli family Le'iloi Nishmas Malka Bas Yosef Began Eden Te'emenuchasa Shushabi Militza Yishar for all family at BS Glatstein. Shiurim on Sefer Bereshis is dedicated by Dr. Zakai Mu Mishpachta Le'nishmas Reb Shlomo Eliezer ben Rabbi Yaakov Zakai, Rivka Bas Tuvi HaLevi, Reb Dov ben Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi HaKoyin. Tonight's shir is dedicated by my dear friend Reb Aryeh and Michelle Jacobson Le'nishmas Aryeh's grandfather, Mr. Aaron Sewek, Aaron ben Mordechai, whose 10th yahrzeit is today, the 20th of Kislev. Tonight's shir is dedicated by my dear friend Rabbi Yaakov Mizrahi of Eretz Yisrael. Hashem should bless him. Shefa bracha v'atzlacha. Okay, Chanukah. Now before we start, you want to know what you should buy for Chanukah, so that's why I'm going to help you out. First of all, the Sefer Birchas HaTzadik is now available. Birchas HaTzadik are the Chidushim of Rabbi Yitzchak Haim Kohen Hoberman. He says that he offers a Maidah, that he decided to pray Bli Neder, that anyone who learns the Sefer and tells over the Torah, to pray that you be saved from any tzara or whatever you need, Yeshua ba'olam hazeh va'olam haba. And one of the reasons I put it in the beginning of the Sefer is because this way the Sefer will sell much better. Okay? That's a good, I'm just being straight. Obviously, it's true, but also that's a good plug for the Sefer. I have a letter here from Tzvi Kushelevsky of the great miracle that happened to him by studying the Sefer Birchas HaTzadik. Right now we have a very limited supply in America. There are copies available in Eretz Yisrael. If you want to get them in Eretz Yisrael, they're available in stores. Also, you could call my friend Reb Sal Orbach. He's also carrying them. Then, make sure you have for Chanukah the light and the splendor. You could ask Reb Sender Schwartz. He underlined almost the entire Sefer. Okay? The light and the splendor. Yeah, I'm right? And make sure you get that. Then it came out, I got it today actually. How do you like that? Just came out. Rabbi Meir Balanes, Walas Hijos Eternos de Hashem. The Spanish edition. I just got it today. Just came out. So this way you first get the English, you get the Lashon Kodesh, you could get the Spanish, and soon to be released in Yiddish. Make sure you get, this way you have what to give out for Chanukah. Okay. We have a very interesting topic today, somewhat unusual, and we're going to discuss the miracle of Chanukah. Of course, there are many different accounts of the story of Chanukah. By the way, if I could mention, you could also join us, Yud Gimel Teves, in Yerushalayim HaKodesh, at the Kever of the Tzaddik of Ranana and Har Menuchos, January 1st. So in honor of the release of the new Sefer, you could join us. Or, we haven't been able to do this in many years, but we used to, before October 7th, we would go up north to Machon Maggid Harakiah. That we're going to be resuming that, Be'ezus Hashem, at the end of January 22nd to the 28th. So make sure you put that on your calendar. Okay.
It's right in back of the Chidah. I went there.
Yeah.
The rough told me where it was. I went.
How did you get off mute though? Okay. So no, I'm joking. It's right near. It's not too far from the Chidah.
Yeah.
The Chidah is straight ahead. Sakranana, you make a right. Okay. So we talk about the miracle of Chanukah. We have many early sources. Some of the earlier sources, of course, is the Alanisim, Bimei Matisyo ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol. Other early sources include Hanerois Halalu, Anachnu Madlikim, Alanisim al Neflois. You have the Gemara and Shabbos. You have the Book of the Maccabees 1, the Book of the Maccabees 2, which are not part of the Tanakh. They're part of the New Testament, but they're not part of the Tanakh. And the various accounts have a different story about what happened on Chanukah. If you look in the Gemara says, "My Chanukah, the Tana Rabbanan, On the B'chaf Hei B'Kislev, Yoimei de Chanukah Timanya Inon. On the 25th day of Kislev are 8 days of Chanukah. Shekishenichnasu when the goyim enter the heichal, timul kol hashmanim shebeheichal, they contaminated all the oil. Uchshegaver malchus beis Chashmonai, when the Hasmonean dynasty prevailed, v'natzcham, and the victorious Badku, they searched for leimatzu elapach echad shel shemen. They found one flask of oil, shayamunach b'chaysamei shel kohen gadol, v'loihaya bay ela lahadlik yom echad, na'asa bay nes, v'edliku mimenu shmani yamim. L'shana ha'acheres kavam v'asa'am yamim toivim b'hala v'hoida. By the way, how many lines of Gemara? 8 lines of Gemara, right? Everybody wants to know why there are 8 days of Chanukah. There are 100 answers in the Sefer Ner Lameya. There are 500 answers in the Sefer Yemei Shmoina. And my answer is because there are 8 lines of Gemara. Imagine if there are 30 lines of Gemara, you know? But there are 8 lines of Gemara about the Yom Tov of Chanukah. And the Gemara's account of the miracle of Chanukah is what happened. There was very little oil, enough to light for 1 night, and miraculously it lit for 8 nights. And the question that the Maral asks is, okay, but what happened that we should make a Yom Tov? Oh, because they had a little bit of oil and now it lasted for 8 days? That's a reason to make a Yom Tov? What exactly are we celebrating? What's the celebration? You're making a Yom Tov because they didn't have enough oil and it now lasted for 8 days? Big deal. Okay, and what would have been the end of the world? So we wouldn't have lit the menorah. Is that so worthy of celebration? You're going to make a Yom Tov for that? I mean, there's a lot involved in this question. One is, you don't make Yom Tovim just because a miracle happens that you could do an avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. That's not deserving of a Yom Tov. Is it? Is that deserving of a Yom Tov? But the main question we're going to ask today, really, under normal circumstances, we really would never even bring up. It comes and is sourced, I have to say, in academic circles. It's a question that scholars have raised. It's a question that secularists have raised. It's not something we would ordinarily have discussed if not for the fact that our Svarim and Sifrei, Svarim Kedoshim and Svarim of Achronim address this question. And that is, the Gemara is the only account of the miracle of the oil. No other account of the Chanukah story says one word about the fact they didn't have enough oil and then they found one flask and it lasted for 8 days. Let's start with our own sources. Okay, Bimei Matasio ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol, Kishagavar Malchus Yovan, Bimei Matasio ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol, Chashmo Banav, Kishamda Malchus Yovan Harashal Amcha Yisrael, Lashkicham Tarasecha, La'avir Mechum Seinecha, Let's see what happened. Raftas Rivam, you took up their cause. Dantas Dinam, Nakamtas Nikmasam, you help us take revenge. Masarta, Gibaram Biad Chaloshim, Rabim Biad Ma'atim, Tmeim Biad Tahirim, Rishon Biad Sadikim, Zaydim Biad Oiska Sarasecha. Okay, you see anything about oil? Ulamcha Yisrael, Susa, Chua, Gedoilo, Furkan, Kayamazeh, Ve'achar Kain, Bovanecha, Ledvir Beisecha, Upinu asechalacha, v'hidliku neiros. They lit neiros. Okay, shkoyach. That doesn't mean they didn't have enough oil. So Alanisim, which was written by, who wrote Alanisim? Yochanan Kohen Gadol himself. He's the man who the miracle happened to. You would expect he would have recorded what happened. He didn't. He just said we won the war. Not one even hint is included in Alanisim that there was a miracle with the oil. Okay, now let's talk about Haneres Halalo. By the way, Haneres Halalo is supposed to have 36 words, but it doesn't. That's because we don't have the original accurate text. Haneres Halalo, Anachnu Madlikin, Al Hanisim v'Al Haneflois, v'Al Hatshuos, v'Al Hamilchamos, Shel Sizav Sinu, Bayama Mehimazman Hazah, Al Yidei Kohanecha Kedoshim, V'Chol Shmois Mechanukah, Mei Chanukah, Hanerois Halalu, Koideshem, Ein Lanu Rishus L'Hishtamesh Bahem, Ella L'Roisam Bavad. By the way, that's not only going on the candles, it's also going on the donuts. Ein Lanu Rishus L'Hishtamesh Bahem, Ella L'Roisam Bavad. Okay, what happened with the oil? No mention is made about the oil. The victory? Yeah, the victory. That we have. What about in the book of the Maccabees? No, nothing's mentioned about the oil. What about in Josephus? Nothing's mentioned about the oil. Nowhere is there one word about the miracle of the oil except for in Talmud Bavli, Masechta Shabbos, Chaf Aleph Amud Beis. That's all. No other record. So because of that, many secular historians have challenged, okay, so maybe Chanukah is just a celebration of the military victory, and the oil is, that's just, we have no evidence that that occurred. So normally we wouldn't bring up such a thing, but this is discussed and brought up in the Sefer Stei Chemed, that he says that he could not imagine. Now I'm going to digress for a moment, because I want to bring to your attention the lashon of the Gemara Masechta Shabbos. The Gemara Masechta Shabbos says, "My Chanukah, de Tanu Rabbanan, bechafhei bekislev yoimei de Chanukah timanya inon." Please tell me, what language is that? Bechafhei bekislev yoimei de Chanukah timanya inon. What language is that? Aramaic. It's not Hebrew, right? Yoimei, not Yemei. Yoimei. Timanya. What language is Timanya? It's Aramaic. Inon. That's Aramaic. And then the Brisa continues, Shekeshenichnasu oivdei kochavim laheichal. What language is that? Hebrew. So did you ever notice that the most well-known Gemara in Shas, you can make the case as the most well-known, everybody knows these 8 lines of Gemara. Are you a Baki in Shas? Yeah. Tanu Rabbanan, Kishenichzu Yivadim Laheichal, right? That's the one Gemara you know, and if somebody asks if you know Shas, you say over this Gemara. But why does it start in Aramaic and the rest of it Hebrew? What's going on over here? So actually, it's important to know, the first clause of this Brisa is something called Megillas Tainus. Did you ever hear of Megillas Tainus? Megillas Tainus is the first recorded Torah Shebal Peh. The very first oral law that was written by Hananiah ben Chizkiah, and he records 36 minor festivals that we do not fast, and it's called Megillas Tainus, the Megillah of days that you're not allowed to fast, and we do not observe any of them anymore except for Chanukah and Purim. Certain days we don't fast, certain days we don't eulogize, and it is obsolete. We do not observe the minor holidays of Megillas Tainus, with the exception of Chanukah and Purim. And the way Megillas Tainus was written, it was written in Aramaic. And the words, B'chavhei B'kislev, Yoimei de Chanukah Timanya Inon, is a direct quote from Megillas Tainus. And the continuation was added later in Lashon HaKodesh as an explanation for Megillas Tainus. So this just explains one of the unusual anomalies found in Shas of one Brisa that begins in one language and continues in another language. Okay. The Maral, and I'm gonna come back to the question that I said the secularists ask. I'm going to start with the Maral's question. The Maral wants to know, why would the Gemara say we're celebrating the miracle of the oil? That does not seem like a reason to celebrate. What are you getting so excited about? Why are you so happy? You went out and you bought presents for your kids, which I don't know if it has anything to do with Chanukah, but you went out and you bought Lego. The thing is plastic. You spent $70 on that set. How? What's made out of gold? But it's a Yom Tif. Why? Because 2,000 years ago they didn't have enough oil, and miraculously it lasted enough. I mean, if I would have a Yom Tif, you know how many miles I've driven without any gas, right? Do I make a Yom Tif every time my tank's on empty and I still get from here all the way to Lakewood on an empty tank? No, I'm joking. I don't go that far. But what's the celebration of not having enough oil? So the Maral says, of course, the Yom Tov of Chanukah has nothing to do with celebrating the fact that the oil was only enough to last for 1 day, and it lasted for 8 days. There is no question we're celebrating one thing and one thing only, the military victory. That's a reason to celebrate. If not for the military victory, we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't have Judaism, we wouldn't have Torah, we wouldn't have mitzvahs, we wouldn't have Shabbos. There is no question. Chanukah is a celebration of the military victory and nothing else. So why does the Gemara say that we're celebrating the miracle of the oil? No, we're not celebrating the miracle of the oil. If not for the oil, then somebody could have misinterpreted that the military victory was just natural. We had good schemes, we had good tactics, we had good soldiers, we had good training, and we won naturally. So the miracle of the oil was needed to frame the victory, the military victory. If not for the miracle of the oil, you would have just brushed off the military victory as good tactic, good machination, good preparation. The miracle of the oil is not what we're celebrating. It's the lens, it's the frame that we use to be able to understand and recognize and appreciate the military victory. That is the famous comment of the Maharal. The Maharal even says, you can't say that the miracle of the oil is the celebration of Chanukah, because if it was, why wouldn't it be in Al Hanisim? The fact that it's not mentioned in Al Hanisim means we're not celebrating it. But it's only needed as the proper frame in order to interpret the miracle of the military victory. You could still ask, so why isn't it in Al Hanisim? Whatever it is, it's needed. So if it's needed, why don't we mention it in Haneres Halalu? Why don't we mention it in Al Hanisim? And it doesn't answer the question that the secularists ask, and I would not bring it up if not for the fact that the Stei Chemed, Reb Chaim Chizkiah Medini, who was born in Yerushalayim, and he was a Rav in Crimea, and then ultimately he was the chief rabbi of Hebron. And if you want to go to his kever, you know who to join. January 22nd. You know where to go? January 22nd to the 28th in Hebron, buried right next to Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi and the Meleches Shloimeh and the Reishis Chachma and the Chesed Avram and others. The Stei Chemed wrote a many-volume encyclopedia. He says regarding the Iker Nes of the Pach Shemen, it is tradition, it is Makubal Eitzel Kol Yisrael, it is Emes V'Yatziv, without any doubt, that this is a great facet of the miracle of Chanukah. And he says, I received a beautiful sefer, a small sefer, but a beautiful sefer, from Rav Isaac Leib from the city of Koznitzo. It's called Neis Pach HaShemen, that the author honored me by bringing to me. And I saw some of the modern rabbis have cast aspersions of the miracle of the oil because it's not found in any source whatsoever other than that small Gemara, Masechta Shabbos. And this Rav, who wrote the Sefer Neis Pach HaShemen, he pushes off all their questions, he's doicha all their rayas, and I enjoyed his Sefer very much. And friends, you should know that this has been the subject of many polemical works, meaning many Rabbanim over the generations have written Sfarim to prove the authenticity of the tradition of the miracle of the oil. But the question that they're dealing with is, why does there seem not to be any record of this in the Al Hanisim, in Haneres Halalu, and as we mentioned, the book of the Maccabees and Josephus. Now, in the book of the Maccabees and in Josephus, you could say the exact rationale that the Maharal says why we need the miracle of the oil is why they don't record the miracle of the oil. If the purpose of the miracle of the oil is so that you don't interpret the military victory as a military acumen, a military tactic, that's why this was important for them not to record, because they did not want to view it through that prism. It was dangerous for them, it was threatening to them to start interpreting that the Jews won the war because the God of Israel was was giving them miraculous salvation. So very likely there was a deliberate attempt to cover up any supernatural interference in the times of Chanukah. But still, why do we not have a record of why do we not record it in the Al Hanisim and in the Haneros Halalu? But now we're going to digress a little bit to deal with another amazing question. Okay? Fasten your seatbelts. So if I were to ask you, what is the main mitzvah of Chanukah? So you'd probably say, to consume high caloric donuts. After all, if you look in the magazines, which was your first mistake, you'll see that on almost every page there are ads for all kinds of new donuts. Now the first thing is, that is a terrible assault on the tradition of the Jewish people, because the Masorah is to eat jelly donuts. There's no Masorah to stuff them with kishka or with pastrami. Who has the audacity to change Minhag Yisrael, to start stuffing it with caramel and chocolate? It's like Loi sha'arum avoseichem. Our forefathers never could have envisioned such a thing. I say chadash aser min haTorah. You know, how dare you tamper with Minhag Yisrael? But even all kidding aside, what would you say the main mitzvah of Chanukah is? Lighting the menorah. So let me ask you a question. So probably if there was a Gemara about what Chanukah would be, probably you would expect, when they say, okay, what did they enact on Chanukah? We could probably surmise, we probably could guess that they would say, they established Chanukah to light the menorah. So you ready? Lashano hacheres, kavam va'asam yamim toivim behalel v'hoida. Are you kidding me? Which Masechta is this? It's in Shabbos. What Perek? Bameh Madlikin. Why is it Bameh Madlikin? Because we're talking about lighting Neros of Shabbos. So Agav Neros Shabbos, we want to bring in Ner Menorah. And here's your chance, Gemara, to explain what Chanukah is all about. What's Chanukah all about? Saying Hallel and saying Al Hanisim. I mean, we set the Brisa up. We're expecting it to say Lashana Acheres Kavam V'Asam Behadlakas Ner Chanukah, and not one word is said in the Gemara about the mitzvah to light the menorah. What in the world happened? What about in Al Hanisim? Bo Vanecha Levir Beisecha Ufinu Es Hechalecha They Vehedliku Neiros B'Chaz Kodecha V'Kavu Shmai Nas Yimei Chanukah Elu, for what? Lahaydais ulahadlik. No, it doesn't say that. It says lahaydais ulahalal. So in Al Hanisim, nothing is mentioned about lighting the menorah. In the Gemara, nothing is mentioned about lighting the menorah. Let's turn to the Rambam. The Rambam says they established Chanukah. Shmoina yamim halalu yimei simcha v'halel Umadlikin Neiros. That's a very, what I call pariv language. He says these are days of happiness, these are days of Hallel, and people light candles. No, the Rambam should say, Yemei HaSimcha v'Hallel ulehadlik neiros, and you need to light candles. No, the Rambam doesn't say that. The Rambam just says, and people light candles. When people light, do they need to, or they just do it? It's almost like saying, you know what Chanukah is? Days of Hallel, Simcha, and some people make parties. Not that you have to, I'm just reporting. Why does the Rambam, when he talks about the menorah, not say you need to light it? He just reports that some people do it. And then at the end of the halacha, are you ready for this? The Rambam says, by the way, lighting the menorah is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, like reading the Megillah. Excuse me? I don't understand. You just had an opportunity a few moments ago to tell us what Chanukah is. So, and you said it's Yimei Hallel, Yimei Simcha. You left out the menorah, and then at the end, you come in on the bottom of the ninth, and you say, by the way, lighting the menorah is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. What about saying Hallel? What about Simcha? You forgot about that? That's the big question. The Gemara omitted the biggest question in history. This is like the biggest question ever. I'm sure at that wedding you were at, probably the reason you left is because nobody bothered asking the main question on Chanukah. And that is the Gemara that reports what Chanukah is left out, that you need to light the menorah. You know your menorah? You know that thing that Jewish people light? You know, it's silver sometimes, or whatever it's made out of, and we light it for 8 days. You know that the Gemara doesn't mention it, doesn't say a word about it. What's going on? So, one of the great Polish Gaonim, his name is Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. My grandfather's mother's father, my great-great-grandfather, was a Talmud of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, and he helped him publish his Sefer Yeshuas Malkai. He had a grandson. The grandson of the Yeshuas Malkai also was the editor of the Yeshuas Malkai's Chidushim, and he wrote, at the end of publishing his grandfather's Chidushim, he wrote a kunshas called Chastei Avos. This is the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. And he says a chidush. I heard Rav Hershel Schachter say that Rav Soloveitchik would always say over this shtickle. I'm going to tell you the kasha Rav Hershel Schachter asked, and I bought him the Sefer because if you look in the Sefer, he answers the question. When I bought it for Rav Hershel Schachter, he learned the entire 3 volumes cover to cover. Okay? He has the following theory, which is probably, it seems to be very well based. You know, when the Klal Yisrael built the Mishkan, and they inaugurated the Mishkan Rosh Chodesh Nisan, each one of the Shvatim had a day to inaugurate the Mizbeach. Reuven, starting with Yehuda, all the 12 Shvatim for the 12 days of Nisan. There's one Shevet that didn't have a chelek in inaugurating the Mizbeach, and that was Shevet Levi. And Aaron felt very bad that he didn't have a chelek in the Chanukah's HaMizbeach. Chazal say, Chosha Daita, he had Chalishas Hadas. So Hashem says, don't worry. Sha'ata madlik u'meiteves haneros. You have something greater than inaugurating the Mizbeach. You have the menorah, which the Ramban interprets. The Mizbeach was only when the Mishkan stood, but the menorah is forever. So Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi explains, actually the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi explains, how is the menorah forever? The menorah is only so long as the Beis HaMikdash stood. When the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, we don't have the menorah. No, the mitzvah of lighting the menorah, the purpose is that we don't have a mizbeach in our house, we don't have an aron in our house, we don't have a shulchan in our house, but the menorah in our house is a continuum of the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash. When you light the menorah in your house, it's like you're continuing the hadlakas ha-menorah of the Beis HaMikdash. That's one of the reasons why asur l'shtamish la'ira, you're now to get benefit from the Ner Chanukah like the menorah of the Beis HaMikdash. So he says, let me ask you a question. If the purpose of lighting the menorah in your house is a continuum of the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash, when the Beis HaMikdash stood, you think people lit a menorah in their house? That would be absurd. If the purpose of lighting the menorah in the house is to have a continuation of the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash, then when there was a menorah in the Beis HaMikdash, there was no reason to light a menorah in your house. Therefore, he says, I suggest that when the Beis HaMikdash stood, from the time of Chanukah until the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, there was no mitzvah of lighting the menorah. We have a machlokes. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel had to light it, and they lived when the Beis HaMikdash. No, the way machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, not Hillel and Shammai. Hillel and Shammai lived when the Beis HaMikdash stood, not Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. When the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, they were masakin a new mitzvah of lighting the menorah. Therefore, the Gemara says, what is Chanukah? L'shana acheres, they made it Hallel. You say Hallel. Haida, you say Alanisim. You don't light the menorah. There's no mitzvah of lighting the menorah. They never made that mitzvah. They didn't make that mitzvah in times of Chanukah. 200 years later, when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, they made a mitzvah to light the menorah. That's why the Rambam in the bottom of the 9 says, by the way, nowadays, lighting the menorah is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, like lighting the Megillah. But it wasn't originally. That's why in the Alanisim, which was written by Yochanan Kohen Gadol, not one word is mentioned about lighting the menorah, because there was no mitzvah to light the menorah. Now, Rav Hershel Schachter said that Rav Soloveitchik would say this over. And he said it's hard for him to understand how this is true because he went to museums, and in the museums, they found menorahs dating back to the time of the second Beis HaMikdash. But if you look carefully in the Chastei Avos, so I bought it for him, because he said that Rav Soloveitchik would say it over, but nobody had the Sefer of Rabbi Shmuel Mikotna. But this Sefer is always very dear to me. My great-great-grandfather helped Rabbi Shmuel Mikotna publish it. If you pay attention carefully to the words of the Rambam, like we mentioned, Yemei Halel v'Simcha, Yemei Simcha v'Halel umadlikin neiros. They did. They lit neiros. They didn't have to. It was something that people did, but it was never legislated. So the fact that they found menorahs doesn't disprove this theory, because the Rambam himself concedes people did it, but it wasn't legislated until later in time when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. They ordained you need to light the menorah. By the way, Rav Moshe Sternbach in Mayadim Uzmanim, he says it's unclear if the Chashmonaim Ubanav enacted to light the menorah in the times of the second Beis HaMikdash. He said he would suggest that they didn't. That's why the Gemara doesn't mention it. That's why it's not mentioned in Al Anisim. And then he says they were Masakein Simcha, Halel, Haida. Some people lit the menorah. Now he says something very interesting. He says, where would they light the menorah? I don't know, maybe at public gatherings. Now it's interesting because there's, the Poskim say that at a public gathering, you do not light a menorah with a bracha. You cannot make a bracha, only in a shul. So if you go to a big Chanukah party and they light them and they make a bracha, no, that's not halachically authorized by the poskim. There are some who do it, but the poskim do not endorse it. But this might be a little bit. I'm not endorsing it halachically because the poskim say not to do it. But the way Rav Sternbach says it is, originally before they were masakin to light in your house, they did light. They lit in different places. So maybe even after they were masakin that each, in other words, originally there was not a mitzvah of ner ishu beisai. There was not a mitzvah on individuals to light the menorah. It only came later in history, but maybe since originally there was a concept of lighting in public areas, maybe that would be some degree of basis. Again, I'm not endorsing that. Okay. But this theory, Rabbi Isai, only explains why the Gemara doesn't mention the mitzvah of lighting the menorah, because there was no mitzvah originally. But this doesn't explain why the Al Anisim and the Haneros Halalu do not discuss the miracle of the oil. Why doesn't the Al Anisim, why doesn't the Haneros Halalu mention the miracle of the oil? It explains why the Gemara doesn't talk about the mitzvah of lighting the menorah. But why don't these early sources talk about the mitzvah, the miracle of the oil lasting for 8 days? The only source is Talmud Bavli. So there's an interesting, by the way, Reb Chaim Kanievsky, in his Sefer Time of the Kra, he says a clever reason why in Al Hanisim the miracle of the oil is not mentioned. He says something very interesting. Why do we say Al Anisim? What bracha do we say Al Anisim in? We say Al Anisim in Maidim. Okay. Says Reb Chaim Kanievsky, we have a Yom Tif of Sukkos. What's the Yom Tif for? The Yom Tif is for the miracle of Anani HaKavod. Is there an obligation of Haida on Sukkos? No. You have a Yom Tif. But there's no mitzvah of Haida. Why is there no mitzvah of Haida? Because what do I have to thank for? I'm happy that my ancestors had climate-controlled stay in the desert, but I don't need to thank for that. Thanking is only when I personally benefit. But if I'm not a personal beneficiary, I could praise, but I don't need to thank. Thank is when you do something for me. Praise is when I know something great was done. So Reb Chaim Kanievsky says there's a very simple reason why the miracle of the oil is not mentioned in Al Anisim. Al Anisim is in Moedim. And in Moedim you're thanking Hashem for benefits that were done to you. So you're a beneficiary of the fact that Jewish people won the war. If not for the war, you wouldn't be here today. You know, if your ancestors did not survive the war, you wouldn't be here. You know that many studies have been done that if you don't have ancestors, then there won't be any descendants. Yeah, you understand what I'm saying? Like if there are no parents, there won't be children. If there are no ancestors, there are no descendants. So if your ancestors didn't survive the war, then you wouldn't be here at the shir. Don't tell me somebody gave you a ride. No, it's not going to help you. If you don't have ancestors, even if someone calls and say, could I drive you to the shir, you still can't come. You understand? Because even if you have a ride, you also need life. You also need to exist. So if you don't exist, right, you understand? Like if you don't exist, you can't come to the shir. Right? You know, you see what I'm getting at, right? So you're a personal beneficiary of the war, but you're not a personal beneficiary of the oil, of what good does it do for you that they had extra oil 2,000 years ago. So in the Al Anisim, Reb Chaim Kanievsky says, we're thanking Hashem. They want to thank Hashem? No problem. You thank Hashem for the military victory. But when the Gemara says, for what nace do they make the Yom Tif of Chanukah? That's the miracle of the oil. That's how Reb Chaim Kanievsky deals with the issue of why the miracle of the oil is omitted in Al Anisim. It's because it's not relevant to Al Anisim. Al Anisim is about thank you. Thank you is, you know what thank you? Thank you is somebody gives you something, you say thank you. That's also important to know, right? If somebody does a favor for you, you say thank you. If somebody does a great feat, you don't say thank you. You say, that was great. So, or you make a Yom Tif. So the Gemara is discussing the Yom Tif. The Yom Tif is for the miracle of the oil. The Haidah is for the military victory.
In Al Anisim it says,
Correct.
Why Shemayna Shemay Chanukah? Why 8 days? Because the oil lasted 8 days, so it is mentioned. If you want to mention that we won a victory in war, that didn't last 8 days.
Why?
The oil lasted 8 days, and that's why we have a holiday.
How do you know the oil lasted 8 days?
It says Shemayna Shemay Chanukah. Why
Okay.
8 days? Because the oil lasted 8 days.
That's, you added that to the Al Anisim. It doesn't say
I
that.
didn't add it. It's in Al Anisim.
It's in Al Anisim that Chanukah is 8 days, but it doesn't say why.
8 days?
I could
Why
tell
not
you.
2 days?
I could tell you many answers for that.
What?
I could give you many answers to that.
One answer. Why 8
You
days?
just want one?
Yeah. I'll be happy with one answer.
Because that year they couldn't observe Sukkot, which was 8 days, so they enacted an 8-day Yom Tif as a replacement, as a makeup for the Yom Tif of Sukkot. That's what it says in the Megillas Antiochus.
Really?
Yeah. Then they took a lulav and esrog then.
I never knew that. Is that true?
Is that true? You know?
I like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Doesn't have to be true. So, what else is the coverage minus me?
Now,
Okay.
so
I give up.
I want to bring to your attention a very interesting approach. Why the Talmud Bavli focuses on the miracle of the oil, and the Al Anisim focuses on the military victory. And this is found in the Sefer Birchas Elisha, Rabbi Yitzchak Yeshaya Weiss. He quotes, and this is a Sefer of Ish Charedi. He quotes a historian who provides the following perspective, which is very interesting, and we're going to come back to the words of the Maral. He tells a story of two people who visited Beersheba. One was a guy from Beersheba, and one was a guy from Schweiz. You know where Schweiz is? Tell them. A guy from Switzerland. Now, Beersheba is one of the hottest places in the world. It's it's an oven there, and it's an oven there in the winter. In the summer, it's on self-clean, okay? And if you ever went to Beersheba, there's a crater there, an extremely deep crater. It's a marvel. There's a crater in Beersheba, and these two guys come to visit the crater for the first time. One is a Beershevian, and one is a guy from Switzerland. And they're both oohing and eyeing, and they never saw anything like it, and they both go home and record in their diary what they saw. The guy from Switzerland writes, I went to the hottest place on earth. I went into a self-clean oven. And that's before I went down into the center of the crater. But as I'm going down, I didn't know. Gehenna felt like it was a freezer compared to how hot it was down there. I never experienced such heat in my life. It was one of the marvels, one of the wonders of the world. The guy from Beersheba goes down to the crater, and he writes, I can't believe it, the depth of this crater. And then I looked up to the top to the opening. I never saw such a height in my life. What a altitude, looking from the bottom of the crater all the way to the top. And then I went to the top and I looked down, and I never saw such a depth in my life. The topography was astounding. And they asked him, the topography? Are you kidding me? It was 190 degrees down there. Why don't you talk about the heat? He says, heat? Because I live in Beersheba. I know what heat is. This wasn't astounding. The heat wasn't astounding. The topography was astounding. So they went to the guy from Schweiz. They went to the guy from Swiss. They said, you're impressed by the heat? What about the peaks and the valleys? He said, are you kidding me? The peaks and the valleys? I'm from the Alps. The peaks and the valleys, this is nothing. But the temperature is out of control. It's 190 degrees down there. So two people could witness and experience the same miracle, but their take on what is astounding about the experience will be different depending on where they're from. So this sefer suggests the following: that in the sources that were written in Eretz Yisrael, namely Al Anisim, Haneros Halalu, they are not impressed by the fact that miracle, that oil that was supposed to last for 1 day lasted for 8 days. They live in Yerushalayim. They're in the Beis HaMikdash all the time. There were 10 miracles daily in the Beis HaMikdash. The fire never swayed. There were never flies in the butcher place. The Kohen Gadol never became tameh. They're gonna make a Yom Tif. They're gonna say the astounding feat, the astounding salvation was oil lasted for 8 days. What are you talking about? Every single week they put the lechem hapanim on the shulchan, and 6 days later, nowadays, you go to a store, the bread is fresh in the morning, 10 minutes later, it's moldy already. Seriously, right? And 5 minutes later, it's moldy even before you get it sometimes, And there in the Beis HaMikdash, they put the bread on the table. 6 days later, it's still piping hot. So they're going to make a Yom Tif. In the Al Anisim, written in Eretz Yisrael by Yochanan Kohen Gadol, he's going to say we're celebrating that the oil lasted for 8 days. The Ner Maravi didn't go out for over 100 years. I remember one time when I was living in Queens, I was walking to shul in the morning, and I looked at the window of the Rav on 73rd Avenue, and his menorah was still going. I asked him, saying, I know this happened in the Beis HaMikdash, but no, he was a brisker. he had these huge cups, It's probably still going now, That particular Rav, for Sukkos, I remember I went into a shul, there was a pile of hadassim on his table, like a mountain of hadassim. So I said, this is so, for the people to come and buy. No, they were all his. They were all his. He bought like a few hundred hadassim, from which, so he had very, very generous shiurim. Anyway, it all depends on your perspective and relative to what. So in the Bnei Eretz Yisrael, Yochanan Kohen Gadol, in the Al Hanisim, in Haneros Halalu, not a word is mentioned about the miracle of the oil, because to them these type of miracles were commonplace. But they had sovereignty for 200 years. The Jewish people were in control of their own destiny. They had independence. And all of a sudden the Yevanim came in and they conquered Jewish civilization and were being subjugated, and Klal Yisrael never experienced something like that. And they waged war against the Yevanim and they won the war. That was astounding for them. The fact that the Jewish people regained their own sovereignty. So for the Bnei Eretz Yisrael, that was the Iker miracle. But if you know about the history of Babylonian Jewry, they went from one brutal king to another, one brutal dictator to another, and some of them gave us the ability to observe their religion. Others subjugated us. So we were constantly going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth between independence and conquest, and independence and conquest. So we're thinking, say, oh, there's a miracle. The miracle, the Yevanim conquered us, and then we won the war. This was like the 19th time that happened in Bavel. So in the Gemara says, what's the miracle of Chanukah? The miracle of Chanukah is the miracle of the oil. In Bavel, they didn't have miracles like that. They didn't experience these type of miraculous feats. This is what is suggested in the Sefer Berchas Elisha, of why the Gemara focuses on the miracle of the oil, and the Al Anisim focuses on the military victory. If that's what happened, that's what happened. I'm just throwing that out as a suggestion from this Sefer. I would say that based on the Maharal, the answer is very simple. The Maharal began, what is the celebration of the Yom Tov of Chanukah? He said, you think we're celebrating the miracle of the oil? We don't celebrate just miracles. The celebration is the military victory. Why do I need the miracle of the oil? Because without the miracle of the oil, you may chalk up the military victory to a good military practice. We had a good general, we had good tactics, we had good soldiers, and if we don't have the miracle of the oil, then you're not going to thank Hashem. So we need the miracle of the oil as the proper lens to use the miracle of the oil in order to appreciate the military victory, to come to thank Hashem. So just think about it. What's the purpose of the miracle of the oil? To thank Hashem. Okay. But if I'm saying Moedim and I'm thanking Hashem, then I'm already there. There's no reason to. We're not grateful for the miracle of the oil per se. By the way, the Pnei Yeshua says it wasn't even needed. We didn't need the miracle of the oil. We could have used tamei oil. Tomos hutra b'tzibor. There was no requirement to use pure oil. So what are we celebrating? The answer is the fact that we saw the divine hand of Hashem meant that when we won the military victory, that was also the divine hand of Hashem. This way, it will ensure that we thank Him. Okay? But what are we thanking Him for? We're thanking Him for the military victory. So if we're already saying the Al Hanisim, or we're already saying Moedim, so we've already come to that recognition. Otherwise, we wouldn't be saying the Moedim in the first place. In other words, according to the Maharal, it's sort of set up very beautifully that the only purpose of the military, of the miracle of the oil, is to use that as a prism in order to come and thank Hashem. But when you're thanking Hashem, you're thanking Him for the military victory, which is exactly what we say in Moedim. In Moedim, the only thing that is mentioned is the military victory, because once you're coming to thank Hashem, so we're already there. In other words, the oil is, oil must have gotten us there. The oil has already brought us to the step that we need to get to. In any event,
Why do we say hallow?
In any event, in any event, I'm going to come back to your question. In any event, these are some thoughts about the Yom Tov of Chanukah, and it's, as we mentioned, the Gemara only talks about the miracle of the oil, and yet the Gemara does not mention the obligation to light the menorah, and the approach that we said tonight of the grandson of Shulam Mikutna, Rav Moshe Sternbach, is that originally that mitzvah was not enacted, not until the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. We'll see everybody, Bez Hashem, next Wednesday night on Chanukah. And until then, bracha v'atzlacha. Shkayach.